Hi everyone, this is Vlad from Modulus Render, and in today's tutorial we're going to talk about how I used Skatter version 2 and TheaRender for this interior scene. First of all, let's take a look at our scene. We have this simple room. Let me just turn off the ceiling. We have a room with a chair. This chair is by Norm Architects. The vases are 101 Copenhagen and tradition, so it's a very Nordic style of design, let's say. And it's very basic, and I wanted to show you guys how I used Skatter and the new Skatter 2 for interiors, because a lot of people use Skatter for exteriors, for grass, for trees, for all kinds of stuff, for pebbles. And I wanted to show you how I use it for an interior render. We're going to do a chunky wool carpet. We're going to put some fuzz on the chair, and we're going to add some grain to the vase. Now, before we do that, I want to explain a little bit how I did the lighting and how the scene is set up, and how I did the floor. The floor is in 3D. It's not a texture map, and I want to show you real quick how I made this type of floor. So we have the tile over here, one tile, and we have the texture that we are going to use. I'm going to rotate the image about 45 degrees and then explode it. Now, once you explode a texture, it becomes projected. So make sure you right click texture and disable the projected option. Now we have our tile. We give it some thickness, and also we bevel it a little bit. This is I think 3 millimeters. Let me check to make sure. Yeah, so it's 3 millimeters. We don't have to do it again. And this is our basic tile or block for our floor. And as you can see, I've beveled it here too. It's a sharp bevel, but we select the whole thing, and then from Thea we just add some nice rounded beveling of 0.1 millimeters, and it will look really cool. So the thing I wanted to show you is how I randomize the texture in this case. So we have our tile, we apply this rotated texture at 45 degrees. It's pretty good. Make it a group, and let's make it a component. We don't need that anymore. And now we can just multiply everything. We can leave a little gap in between, let's say 10 times, and we'll do a copy and scale it -1, enter, and then we have another row. And of course we can be very exact about the gap. I'm just eyeballing it here for our example, and we just take this and multiply it in every direction how many times we need to. So I'm just gonna do 5. Okay, and of course we can keep multiplying and cover the floor area that we are doing. The problem with this is that the texture on each individual group is exactly the same. So we'll have a lot of repetition. You see, you can even see this knot here just being multiplied all over the place. once you have your layout arranged, you explode the whole geometry, because the texture, I mean because the plugin we're going to use does not support or doesn't work well with components or groups. So I would just like to explode everything after I'm done with the layout on the floor. So we have each individual face, but because they're a little bit at a distance one from each other, I can still go ahead and select everything. So we have our floor, we select, and then we go to texture randomizer, and then we add in some values, whatever we want, some scale variations, no mirroring, because we don't want the texture to be flipped on the short size of the tile, and some rotation, maybe 10 degrees. Hit OK. We wait, and as you can see now, we have some variation on each of the tiles, and on the whole floor this looks really nice. So this is basically how I did the floor, and then I changed the texture because I wanted to have this dark wood feeling. I have some reference photos here because the whole mood of this scene is from Norm Architects, or inspired by Norm Architects, because the furniture is designed by them. And I found these great images. It's a commercial space, but I really like the mood. So it's very shadowy and dark. So something like this was the reference, and I really like the fact that you don't really see everything in the shadows, so it's more dramatic, let's say. Okay, so we have a simple room. Let's talk a little bit about the lighting. As you can see, I've put some 2D trees in the windows to have some variation in the shadow, because I want the sun to come through the window, and I want the shadow more visible around here. So I want the branches to affect and be really visible in the shadows. Our lighting is just the sun, and with some soft shadow, and for the illumination I've put just a white color, multiplied it by 5, and the camera settings, the exposure is filmic. I always use filmic. I just like the tones in the shadow with filmic. The highlights 65, the shadows 15, ISO 400 to have more light in the interior, because it's very dark. And I also brought the shutter down to 100. For the settings, nothing special. So the camera was, I have some depth of field, it's 5.6, and I usually leave it at autofocus, but for this scene right here, I've set it manually. To compensate for all of this darkness, I've put 2 light planes in the room, and these light planes are invisible to the camera. If you go to model or object settings, I've unticked visible to camera, reflections, and shadows for each of these. And the material is an emissive material, which is set to 3 watts per, I don't know what that is, nanometer, I don't know. So anyway, let's have a look and see how this looks without the scattered objects for now. Okay, now I'll just disable my compositions. We have the wool knots on the carpet, the chair fuzz, and the grain on the vase that we're going to talk about. But for now, I just want to take a look at the overall exposure of the image and see if it's good or not. So I'm just going to disable the scattered objects, and let's take a look at a preview without denoiser. Now this is the preview, and it's looking pretty good, similar to what I want. Maybe a little bit dark in the back over there, but let's just see if we can increase the light material, which is this one. Let's try 5. Which is going to bring us or give us more light in the interior. It's looking pretty good. And then if we want more light, we can tweak it from the ISO, for example, like this. But this is a little too bright, so maybe 400 was good. Okay, it's looking pretty good. We can go ahead and add the scattered objects, so we can have some texture, some feel to this. I usually use scatter to add these things in a scene, and it makes it more realistic. So stuff like fur or fuzz on a carpet, on a chair, on a blanket, some texture, some randomized 3D texture on an object. So dust particles, water drops. So, you know, these little details, I think scatter is a great tool for SketchUp, for Thea, and it works really great and really fast. So let's start with the carpet. So for the carpet, I made some weird looking shapes that I wanted to scatter across the carpet, because I want this kind of wool chunky carpet filled with all kinds of knots. So I have some reference images over here. So something similar, something like this. These like spheres with all kinds of fuzz on them, maybe a pattern. So something like this. So in order for me to do that, I made a simple shape, something that looks like this. It's just cubes, pushed, pulled, and then with artisan or sub-D or whatever you like for subdividing your model, I did something like this, added a texture. It's a rope texture that I put on top, and I wanted to see and to play around with these two. So to have these shapes coming out of it, maybe for a little bit of shadow, and with a lot of fuzz on them too. So this is what I used, very simple and basic, but with in combination with Scatter and Thea, you can have really great results. So in the end, I use these, this hairy ball here. I made a composition with Scatter, so let's take a look at that. This is Scatter version 2, and the interface changed, and it's really nice. It's very easy to understand and to follow, and it really renders a lot faster than the previous version, because I did these renders and the animations in Thea and it rendered a lot faster than it did with Scatter version 1. So this is a great plus for them. Now let's activate the wool knots and edit. Okay, so first of all, you'll see there's a lot of knots, a lot of scattered objects. So we chose the rug as the host. We put the component that I just showed you, and then the distribution, I used a grid distribution, 1 centimeter, 1.5 apart from each other. And then the nice thing here, you have a slider that you can put some holes or some variety in the pattern. So I've put like 14% holes and then 40% rotation because I wanted them slightly at an angle. And then I used a mask, which is, let me show you this line here. So this line, I wanted the wool knots to be a little bit away from the margins of the carpet. So we would have a little border that doesn't have this texture on it. Let me see if I can open up the reference images. So maybe something like this, right? I don't want the knots to be all over the carpet. I just want a little bit of a border. And for that, I use this line as a mask. And then, where is it? In the settings, I've put a border of 2 centimeters from the margin. So this line is basically the outline of the carpet. You can see it here in this dotted line, right? And 2 centimeters is this line. So if I want a bigger border, then I put 4, and then you'll see this will move back, and then I'll have a 4 centimeter border around the carpet. So I'll just leave it at 2 because I think it looks good. And of course, render only, and we can generate our scattered objects. Now, the scale of the object doesn't really matter because you'll see in a minute, the fuzz I used for the chair is this big. So it doesn't really matter the scale of this object, but when we put it inside of a composition for scatter, then we can control the object scale. So let me just, where is it? Here. Size multiplier, I've set it to 5%, and that's why everything is a lot smaller. And of course, some variation from rotation and scale. So random scale and some random rotation added to this. Okay, so let's take a look and see how this composition looks in our model. Now there's a lot of blur because of the depth of field. Let's just put this to pinhole. And you'll see there's a color variation on the carpet texture. And this is where Thea in combination with Scatter works really great, because we have a random color for this texture. So if I go to textures and pick this, well, not this, not the carpet, the wool texture. Let me just zoom out. And then I'll select this texture and go back. You can even see from the preview that it's rendering pretty fast. And I'm using, right now for the tutorial, I'm using my laptop, which has only one GPU card, 2070. It's cleaning up pretty good, pretty fast. So we have the texture, and let me just show you, if we didn't have this random texture, it would look like this. So very, I mean the same texture all over the carpet. So I selected this, I put a strong normal map on it so we would have some variation in the shape of the knot. So we just select the texture and then we mix with random color. And when we mix with the random color, it will put a lot of variation from white to black. But I don't want to have a carpet that has so much contrast in it, so we just change the values. For example, for the darks should be like a dark gray, and the light ones should be like a light gray, maybe lighter, like that. So we have some variation in the color, which is really great. Makes everything look a little bit more natural. And if you look closely, you can even see the fuzz on all of these elements. So this is pretty cool. And again, it renders really fast. Now for the next step, let's make some fuzz on the fabric of the chair. So it looks like the owner has like a cat that likes to sharpen its claws on the chair. For this, we're going to use the other composition, chair fuzz. Let me just open that and we can take a look. And now for the chair fuzz, you can see it's a lot of elements that were scattered here, and we have a different color which we can change for each of the little hairs, or for each object. Let me just show you the settings first. So we have 8 little hairs that were scattered across the textile, and then distribution is uniform, and then the mode is face space. So this way it's all over it, on the back, everywhere. And it looks really cool. And I didn't do a lot of things to it, just some random scale and some random rotation. And of course, aligned to the normal of the face. They're not pointing up. And that's pretty much it. It's not a lot of complicated stuff, just that the fuzz that I made, the little strands of hair are looking like this. So I made these weird shapes to have some variation in the overall look of the fuzz, and they're all components, and make sure the origin or the axis of the components are set here in this area. So whenever Skatter places them, it places them, I mean the root of the object is here. It's not, the axes are not in the middle over here or someplace else, because that will move things around and you'll get some results that don't look so good. So we have the fuzz on the chair. Let me just zoom in through the wall. This is taking forever. Okay. So we have this rainbow looking chair. And then another thing I did, I used scatter for this vase. This is a very good looking vase made by 101 Copenhagen. And I'll show you not this, but this. I wanted to have some grain on it, so I've scattered a lot of little spheres. So the object that I scattered, I'll show you, is this sphere with the same material applied to it, the same material than the vase. So for the vase, I've put a lot of spheres on it, again, randomly scattered. I used face space and a lot of objects because I wanted to make them really small. So the scale multiplier is set to 1%. So they're really small and a lot of them. And then again, some scale, and there's no need for rotation because they're spheres. So whichever way they rotate, they look the same. So just some variation in the shape or in the scale of them was enough. So now we have everything set up. Let's take a look at some previews of the fuzz on the chair and the grain on the vase. So let's take a look. I think everything is on now. Yep. Okay, so now that it's rendering, we can see this insane amount of fuzz on the chair. Of course, we can play around with the scale, because if I'm further away from the chair, it's gonna look pretty good. It's not gonna be so visible, only if you really look at it. But when you're close up to it, then we might adjust the scale and bring it down a little bit, so make everything a little bit smaller. But I kind of like it like this. So we have some fuzz on the chair. And again, the material for the fuzz is randomized through TheaRender with the random color. So we have some variation. It's not all of it white or all of it one color. It varies with these shades of blue that we have in the textile material. And for the vase, you'll see the grain appearing because it's kind of small, but you'll see it in a little bit, you see. And this is just a simple sphere that was scattered across an object. So it's not complicated. It just creates a really cool effect. So the spheres are really small. You can see them here. But again, depending on the point of view, you adjust the scale of the scattered object. So if I'm looking at it from here, you can't notice the little spheres. You just see the overall texture of it, and it looks pretty good. Okay, now we're ready to render our final images. We can start framing our final shots, saving the scenes, and then I'll show you my final render settings. I usually go with 500 samples if the super sampling is set to auto, or if I want to render a little bit faster, then I don't use super sampling and I put a little bit more samples here, maybe 1000, and it renders really fast. But if you don't have enough light in the scene, then your images will be noisy. So for this one, because I have a lot of fine details in the scattered objects, I let the super sampling to auto and then just use 512. It was enough with some denoising. So I usually have NVIDIA denoiser on at 30%. And now we can just play around with our images, our framing, and start rendering. Now these are some of the images that I did using this technique. If you found this information useful, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. And if you want to support this channel and you want to purchase Skatter version 2, please use the links in the description below. And I'll see you in the next tutorial.